Emily always loved the independence of living alone in her cozy suburban house. Her evenings were spent reading or watching TV, feeling safe in her little sanctuary. One chilly autumn night, she curled up on the couch with a good book, the wind howling outside. The first hint of something wrong came when she heard a faint tapping sound at the window. Emily brushed it off as tree branches swaying in the wind. But the tapping continued, growing more insistent. Nervous, she pulled the curtains back and peered into the darkness. Nothing was there. Trying to shake off the unease, Emily returned to her book. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the house into darkness. Emily's heart raced as she fumbled for her phone, using its light to guide her to the fuse box in the basement. As she descended the stairs, the air grew colder, and an unsettling feeling washed over her. She reached the fuse box and flipped the switches, but the lights remained off. Panic set in. She heard footsteps behind her, slow and deliberate. Emily spun around, shining her phone's light into the darkness. Nothing. She rushed back upstairs, locking the basement door behind her. The footsteps followed, now louder and closer. She ran to the living room, frantically searching for something to defend herself with. The footsteps stopped just outside the living room door. Emily's breath caught in her throat as the doorknob slowly turned. She held her breath, gripping a heavy candlestick. The door creaked open, revealing an empty hallway. Relieved yet terrified, Emily stepped back. Suddenly, a shadowy figure darted across the room, disappearing into the kitchen. She screamed and ran for the front door, but it was locked from the inside, and the key was missing. Desperate, she grabbed her phone and dialed 911. The operator assured her help was on the way, but it would take a while due to the storm. Emily barricaded herself in the living room, her eyes darting to every shadow. Minutes felt like hours. The house was eerily silent, except for the sound of her own rapid breathing. Then she heard it again, the slow, deliberate footsteps, now coming from upstairs. She realized with horror that the intruder was still inside. Emily's heart pounded as she clutched the candlestick, ready to defend herself. The footsteps grew louder, descending the stairs. She saw a shadow moving across the wall, getting closer and closer. Suddenly, the figure emerged from the darkness, a man with a twisted grin, his eyes gleaming with malice. Emily swung the candlestick, but he dodged easily, grabbing her arm and pulling her close. She struggled, but his grip was ironclad. Just as she thought it was over, blue and red lights flashed outside, and the sound of sirens filled the air. The intruder released her, disappearing into the shadows once more. Emily stumbled to the front door, unlocking it as the police burst in. They searched the house, but there was no sign of the intruder. Emily was shaken but safe. The police assured her they would keep an eye on the house, but Emily knew she would never feel truly safe there again. She stayed with a friend for a few days, but eventually returned to her home, determined not to let fear control her. She installed security cameras and extra locks, hoping to regain some sense of normalcy. Yet every night, as the wind howled outside and shadows danced on the walls, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She knew the intruder was still out there, waiting for another chance to slip into the shadows and strike again. Jake's parents were out of town for the weekend, leaving him alone in their spacious house. He planned to spend the time gaming and binge-watching his favorite shows. The first night was uneventful, and he enjoyed the solitude. The second night, as he was immersed in a horror movie, the phone rang. He paused the movie, annoyed at the interruption. Picking up the cordless phone, he answered, but no one spoke on the other end. He hung up, assuming it was a prank call. Moments later, the phone rang again. This time, he let it go to voicemail. A chill ran down his spine as he heard the faint sound of breathing, followed by a click as the call ended. Jake shrugged it off, blaming it on the movie's atmosphere. As the night wore on, the calls continued, each one more unsettling than the last. He tried to ignore them, but the persistent ringing gnawed at his nerves. Finally, he unplugged the phone and went to bed, hoping for a peaceful night's sleep. Jake was jolted awake by the sound of the doorbell ringing incessantly. He glanced at the clock. It was 3 a.m. He crept to the window, peering out cautiously. There was no one there. His heart pounded as he checked the locks and turned on all the lights. The doorbell rang again, followed by loud banging on the door. Jake grabbed a baseball bat from his closet, ready to defend himself. The banging stopped, and an eerie silence settled over the house. He dialed 911, his hands shaking. The operator stayed on the line with him as he waited for the police. Suddenly, he heard footsteps coming from upstairs. Jake froze, his blood running cold. He was certain he had locked all the doors and windows. The footsteps grew louder, moving closer. Jake's mind raced as he tried to figure out how someone could have gotten inside. The operator assured him the police were on their way, but Jake knew he couldn't wait. He cautiously made his way to the stairs, gripping the bat tightly. As he reached the top, the footsteps stopped abruptly. The hallway was dark and silent. He crept towards his bedroom where the noise had originated. The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open, his breath catching in his throat. The room was empty, but the window was wide open, curtains billowing in the breeze. Jake was certain he had closed it earlier. He slammed the window shut and turned to leave, but something caught his eye. Scrawled on the wall in what looked like red paint were the words, "I see you." Panic surged through him as he realized the intruder was toying with him. The sound of sirens outside brought a wave of relief. Jake rushed downstairs to meet the police, explaining what had happened. They searched the house thoroughly but found no sign of forced entry or anyone inside. The police assured him they would patrol the area, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He decided to stay with a friend for the rest of the weekend, leaving the house locked up tight. When his parents returned, Jake told them everything. They were skeptical, but installed a security system for his peace of mind. Weeks passed, and life returned to normal, though Jake remained on edge. Late one night, as he was falling asleep, his phone buzzed with a new voicemail. Dread filled him as he played the message. The familiar sound of breathing echoed in his ear, followed by a chilling whisper, "I'll be back." Lily had always been fascinated by antique stores, so when she found an ornate mirror at a local shop, she bought it without hesitation. The mirror had a gilded frame with intricate designs, and its surface was slightly tarnished, adding to its charm. She hung the mirror in her bedroom, admiring how it added a touch of elegance to the room. That night, as she was getting ready for bed, she noticed something strange. The reflection in the mirror seemed slightly off, almost as if it was delayed by a fraction of a second. Dismissing it as her imagination, Lily went to bed. She was jolted awake in the middle of the night by a cold breeze. The window was closed, but the mirror seemed to emit an icy chill. She shivered and pulled the covers tighter, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling. Over the next few days, the strange occurrences continued. Objects in her room appeared slightly out of place in the mirror's reflection, and sometimes she thought she saw fleeting shadows moving behind her. One evening, as she was brushing her hair, she glanced at the mirror and froze. Her reflection was smiling at her, but she wasn't smiling. The reflection's eyes gleamed with a malevolent light, and its smile widened into a sinister grin. Lily's heart pounded as she stepped back, her eyes locked on the mirror. The reflection mimicked her movements, but maintained the eerie smile. Panic set in, and she covered the mirror with a cloth, hoping to block out the unsettling image. That night, she dreamed of a dark figure trapped inside the mirror, desperately trying to escape. The figure's face was contorted with rage and sorrow, its eyes pleading for release. She woke up in a cold sweat, the image seared into her mind. Determined to get rid of the mirror, Lily called the antique store, but the owner claimed to have no recollection of selling it. Desperate, she decided to research its origins. She discovered that the mirror had once belonged to a woman accused of witchcraft centuries ago. The woman known as Eliza was said to have been trapped inside the mirror as punishment for her dark deeds. According to legend, her spirit could manipulate the reflections to torment the living. Lily felt a chill run down her spine as she read the stories. She decided to seek help from a local historian who specialized in the occult. The historian listened to her story and agreed to visit her home. He examined the mirror and confirmed her fears. It was a vessel for Eliza's vengeful spirit. The historian explained that Eliza could only be freed if someone willingly released her, but doing so would unleash her wrath. He suggested destroying the mirror to prevent further torment. Lily agreed, desperate to end the nightmare. That night, as she prepared to smash the mirror, Eliza's reflection appeared, pleading for mercy. "Please, don't destroy me," she whispered. "I was wronged. Set me free, and I will leave you in peace." Lily hesitated, torn between fear and compassion. Summoning her courage, Lily raised the hammer and struck the mirror. It shattered into pieces, releasing a deafening scream. The shards scattered across the floor, and the room fell silent. She felt a wave of relief, believing the ordeal was over. But as she cleaned up the broken glass, she noticed something horrifying. Her reflection in the fragments was no longer her own. Eliza's malevolent grin stared back at her from every piece. Panic surged through her as she realized the spirit was still present. Desperate and terrified, Lily fled her home, leaving the cursed mirror behind. She moved to a new town, but the feeling of being watched never left her. Every mirror, every reflective surface became a source of dread. She knew Eliza's spirit was still out there, waiting for another chance to escape.